Should be able to turn the mic. Okay. Hello, everyone on X. We are on X right now. We are also on YouTube and Twitch. So I am joined by FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr today. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on. Really look forward to it.
Yeah, and I think that you issued your dissent statement on December 12th. So been a few days now. You also did an space on Tesla Talk. And so I'm really glad that you're able to talk with us today. A little bit about my background. I've been covering Starlink from the Better Than Nothing beta days. So I remember this initial, 2020 subsidy. And so let's talk a little bit about, some background and where we are today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good to be with you. So as you indicate, I'm one of the commissioners here at the Federal Communications Commission in D.C. There's 5 commissioners, 3 are Democrat, 2 are Republican. It goes with the presidency. So the majority is always the same as the president. So I'm the senior Republican. And this particular decision was a 3-2 party line vote to reverse this decision back in 2020 to award Starlink a nearly $1 billion award to help bring high-speed internet service to about 640,000 homes and businesses spread across something like 35 states, mostly in rural parts of the country. So we conducted a larger auction, about $9 billion. There was 180 winners. So Starlink was one of 180 companies that won some amount of that $9 billion to bring high-speed service to rural America. And then that was, again, 2020. Flash forward just a week or so ago, and the FCC voted to reverse that decision. And it's a one that doesn't really make a lot of sense when measured from sort of the facts or the law. Basically, Starlink had to provide high-speed service, what we call 100 over 20, low latency, to at least 40% of those 640,000 locations by 2025, actually by the end of 2025. And so they had no obligation at all right now, but the FCC said, and this part is legitimate. The FCC said, we need to make a decision now. Do we think it's reasonably likely that Starlink is going to fulfill that commitment? Because if it's not, if we have like a fly-by-night company that happened to win, then we want to be able to have a chance to redirect those subsidies before another 2-year passes and people don't have internet. But basically, the FCC sort of moved the goalpost and invented an entirely new standard for judging whether an entity is reasonably likely to fulfill its obligation, and applied it to just one of those 180 winners. And it was just to Starlink. It was a standard, frankly, that not just Starlink, but nobody could have fulfilled.
No. And I have to say, reading your dissent statement, I was just getting quite livid, because it's like, why is this not being talked about more? You must be pretty upset with the commission right now.
Well, look, my colleagues and I, we actually get along really, really well. We just don't quite see eye to eye on some things. We have very strong policy disagreements, and this is one of them. And look, again, I think this is a decision that really can't be explained on its merits. I think the only way to explain it is to see it as part of this pattern of what, not my term, but the Wall Street Journal described as regulatory harassment of Elon Musk. And I think it goes back to the White House. Last year, President Biden stood at the podium. It was, adorned with the seal of the President of the United States. And he said that Elon Musk is worth being looked into. And a reporter followed up and said, how? President Biden looked down and said, there's a lot of ways. And there are. Look, we've seen an unprecedented deluge of regulatory inquiries since then. You've got the DOJ, the Federal Trade Commission, the FAA, the Southern District of New York. You've got even the Fish and Wildlife Services going after him. And now you've got the FCC as well. And again, I just, none of those decisions seem to make a lot of sense, other than viewing them as part of a pattern that has largely flown from that time that President Biden took the podium in the White House.
Well, and you know what? I have that clip right now, so let's pull it up. This is from November of 2022, if I'm understanding correctly from the article. Yep. It's about a 1-minute clip. So let's play what President Biden said.
Mr. President, do you think Elon Musk is a threat to U.S. national security? And should the U.S., and with the tools you have, investigate his joint acquisition of Twitter with foreign governments, which include the Saudis?
I think that Elon Musk's cooperation and/or technical relationships with other countries is worthy of being looked at. Whether or not he is doing anything inappropriate, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that it's worth being looked at. But that's all I'll say.
So very strange. That might be the slowest response I've ever heard. That was very hard to listen to. But you were saying that, that response sort of gave the green light to all sorts of agencies, not just the FCC. We've seen it time and time again with the FAA, even with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So you're seeing a pattern, the Wall Street Journal seeing a pattern. So what can we do about this? I mean, obviously you're raising awareness. You issued your dissent statement, which I have, if we want to pull that up at some point in this conversation.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. It's clearly a pattern that's emerged. And look, on the one hand, you could say Elon Musk has a lot of businesses, and so he's naturally going to have a lot of run-ins with regulators, and that's true to some extent. But again, if you look individually at these on the merits, take the Federal Trade Commission, for instance, they were going after him for disclosing to reporters and journalists information that they were reporting on pursuant to the Twitter files. Or you look at the NLRB, they were going after Tesla for effectively dress code violations because they were requiring people to wear black T-shirts to work, which actually had a sort of an engineering basis, and not allowing them to wear apparently, pro-unionization T-shirts. It was effectively a dress code violation. Or you've got the Fish and Wildlife Services, which I think we've talked about a little bit. They went after them, or started to at least, there was a handful of bobwhite quail eggs and some blue land crabs that were charred as a result of a SpaceX launch. And I don't know, that sounds more like surf and turf to me than a federal case, but it's sort of part and parcel of what's being built here in terms of these, federal agencies looking into Elon Musk. And again, I personally think it's hard to divorce that from where Elon Musk has gone in terms of his position on free speech. I think, this idea of, unfettered conversations and Americans having them is something that, people in power just are not that big of fans of, right? People like being able to sort of control the narrative, to have gatekeepers that sort of approve of what, people can talk about. And I think that concept of free speech is fundamentally a threat. Now, look, if you look at, what Biden said narrowly, he did sort of talk about these ties to, foreign countries or whatnot. But the inquiries that we've seen coming out of the administrative state are completely disconnected from any concern on that front. That's why I just think, regulators sitting here in DC, when you see the president say something like that, I think it pretty clearly operates as a green light. So yeah, I think it's important that people push back. Elon Musk can take some of these cases up on appeal, but I just think it's fundamentally important that people know that we're watching this type of thing, and hopefully we see less of it going forward.
Right. So let me just reiterate for the audience, if they're not understanding or up to speed, you're saying that the FCC set a standard that Starlink was to meet in 2025. Yet here we are at the end of 2023, and they're being denied because they still haven't, which they probably have met that standard. I know that so many people in rural communities are benefiting from Starlink. In fact, some of my first stories about Starlink in the Better Than Nothing beta days. So before this was, massively rolled out like it is now, over 51 satellites in orbit providing service. There was a rural school district in Virginia. This was during the pandemic. They needed to have service. They relied on Starlink. They took a chance on Starlink when it was brand new. So, it's enhanced only, in the last few years. So why is the FCC unfairly, penalizing Starlink? It just, in my mind, it's like, how can they get away with this?
Yeah, it's an odd one. So, what the FCC said was basically, so Starlink didn't have to have any obligation to do anything until December of 2025. So a long ways away. And what the FCC said was, well, you're not already providing, by our assessment, 100/20 high-speed service nationwide today. But as I noted in my dissent, that's effectively moving the goalpost. We didn't require anybody else to meet their obligation 2 years earlier. Now, to be even more fair to the FCC, what they're really saying is we're projecting that we don't think they're going to get there by the end of 2025. But again, that reasoning doesn't fare any better. What the FCC did was they looked at two Ookla speed test points of data. This is sort of a nationwide average at 2 points in time. And they said, look, you're below 120 at these 2 points in time, which again, that has nothing to do at all with where Starlink is going to be in 2025. They also said that, Starship, quote unquote, failed. But again, that sort of fundamentally misunderstands technology, but how you sort of learn. There's this hockey stick curve that technology goes through, and there's some sawtoothing along the way, to be sure. But the trajectory here is clear. And most fundamentally, I think what people get is this. The federal government itself is relying on Starlink when connectivity matters the most. Our military is entering into multi-million-dollar contracts. So this idea that the FCC says, this is kind of a, not a not reliable technology. But then on the other hand, you see what the federal government's doing with putting its own money there when connectivity matters. It just doesn't make sense. And I think another way to think about this is I sort of describe the Biden administration as having a need-hate relationship with Elon Musk. On the one hand, the government needs Elon Musk and his technologies to deliver on a lot of their policy priorities, like outer space, right? Like you need SpaceX to deliver on a lot of NASA's goals. You need Elon Musk technologies for a lot of the electronic vehicle, EV goals that the administration has. And so where there's no other technology available, you do see the government relying on Elon Musk's technology. But where they feel like they can get away with, these sort of regulatory harassment or these sort of regulatory duck bites, then you see that. And that's what you see, I think, with Starlink. So it is this sort of odd need-hate relationship where they rely on him, where they have no other choice, but where they feel like they have another choice, you see outcomes like this and like Fish and Wildlife Service and like NLRB.
Yeah, and I very much respect you and appreciate you speaking up about this. And let's put the competitors to the test. Let's put HughesNet, Viasat. Oh, maybe Amazon's Project Kuiper. Oh, wait, it's not ready. Like, it just seems crazy to me. The more I read your statement.
Yeah, there are some competitive dynamics. I mean, as you noted, Amazon Kuiper is getting up and running, and I'm hopeful that there'll be sort of another new entrant and another competitor here. But more broadly, this one program, which was about $9 billion, is part of what we have at the FCC called this Federal Universal Service Program. And we spend about $4.5 billion every single year supporting the build out of high-speed internet to rural and remote communities. And historically, that's been a very fiber-heavy program. And I like fiber. I've spliced a lot of fiber. It's got tremendous capacity. But we need to try to proceed in a technology neutral way. So that's why we let Starlink compete in the first, and that's why we let we call fixed wireless providers compete. That's why we let 5G providers compete, and it delivers really for the taxpayer. So we were going to spend about $1,300 in federal subsidies to make sure that Starlink would be available to these 640,000 locations. If you were to bring fiber to that location, to all those locations, it'd be something in the order of almost $5,000 per location. In other words, where we were spending, roughly $880 million, it's going to cost, $3 or more billion to get a substitute fiber connection there. And it takes time too. So, we could have connected people virtually overnight, but instead we're telling them to wait years stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide because we're going to get you fiber at some point in the future, maybe.
Right.
And so I just don't think, again, it's from that sort of policy perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then also geopolitics. Look, China is working hard to stand up their own version of Starlink. They're going to call it StarNet because the CCP just steals and copies a lot of things. And so the U.S. government should be standing behind America's innovators, whether it's Elon Musk Starlink or Amazon Kuiper, because StarNet, the CCP version, is going to be up and running maybe 2028, give or take a year. And that's, going to be a really interesting geopolitical development when China can become the global internet provider per se for all of Africa or all of South America. Right. And then when China does it, they're not going to do it with freedom of speech. They're going to do it with content filters and all sorts of other controls. And so given the advantage that the U.S. has right now, again, we should be having the backs of U.S. Innovators. But also it goes back fundamentally to the administrative state. I mean, we have so many rules and so many regulations that we're just holding back America's builders. I mean, we've seen a lot of great growth in the app economy and in Silicon Valley and in software, largely unregulated areas. But anywhere where you touch sufficiently the federal government, and Elon Musk has done that a lot, whether it's cars or rocket ships or satellite internet providers. It's a challenge. We're sort of stuck in this. It's like, Gulliver's Travel when he goes to the land of Lilliputians, and he wakes up and he's being held down by thousands and thousands of little ropes. And that's kind of what we at the federal government are doing to American innovators, is we're just holding them back with unnecessary regulations. We got to have some, right? I'm not like a no regulation guy. We got to have some guardrails in place, but we've really overdone it in some cases, and it's hurting our capacity as a country to build things. I mean, whether it's housing or, internet infrastructure.
Right. Well, and as you mentioned, not getting this money is not going to hurt Elon. It's going to hurt the people who truly need this service.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, almost $1 billion. I think Elon Musk himself will be fine without that. But we had 640,000 people who we had a commitment to make available to them the option of getting this high-speed internet service, and we vaporized it and we replaced it with nothing other than maybe we'll get to you again with another program.
Right.
Another few $1 billion down the road somewhere else. So, I think the loser are, the rural Americans that get left behind. The loser is America's geopolitical leadership, as, StarNet is certainly going to have the backing of the CCP.
Right. Well, and just to get a little bit more detail about the decision and, the back and forth, Chris wants to know, did SpaceX ever receive cash, or did they just win the contract?
Yeah, I don't believe that money ever actually went to them. So they won the award, and then you file what's called a long form application. And the FCC is reviewing that. And that's what the FCC reviewed technically and disapproved, was the long form application. So they never got to the process of being finally approved to receive the funding.
And also on the other side of that coin, were any of these rural users able to get the Starlink from this grant yet?
It wouldn't be from this grant, but Starlink hopefully is going to be available nonetheless. So again, what this money was designed to do, the $800 million, was designed to ensure that Starlink put up the satellites, the ground stations, the capacity necessary to provide high-speed service to all of those 640,000 people. There were some opportunity costs that Starlink was going to run into as well. So that was what the compensation was for. It's still possible that someone could, on their own, attempt to sign up for Starlink and pay for Starlink. And there may be the capacity there, but there's no longer a federal guarantee that those 640,000 homes and businesses will have the ability to get service. It could be that, the capacity is going somewhere else. It could be that they just don't invest in the ground infrastructure. It could be they're not directing the beams in the right places. So there is still a chance that, some significant portion of those people can still sign up for Starlink, which is, maybe some good news at the end of the day, but it would be, despite the federal government, not because of it.
Now, if they hadn't have reversed this decision and we made it all the way to, 2025, would these 640,000 users been able to have the service at no cost to them? Would they be looking at paying for the hardware? How would that part work?
Yeah, they'd still be a cost to the end user. The federal investment of $800 million was mainly to make sure that Starlink, put the infrastructure in place to have the capacity to deliver that service to them. Participating in this program would have come with some what we call sort of light rate regulations. So there would have been some controls the federal government would have put on. I mean, after all, we're giving all this money. We'd want, not you to charge, not, monopoly prices. So they would have got it with some light rate regulation in place. But, look, one other alternative here entirely would be, rather than spending, all of this money that we spend at the federal government, you could conceivably, send all of these customers, potential customers, a $600 coupon for Starlink, or when Amazon Kuiper comes up, Amazon Kuiper service. And then instead of spending $1,300, we can potentially spend just $600 and still provide this type of service. But again, this whole federal program of universal service, it gets very political, it gets very technical, it's very complicated. And frankly, that whole system is in need of a fundamental rethink.
Right. Well, and I want to pull up your dissent statement that you shared on X. What prompted you to speak out about this? Were you nervous about being so public with sort of your disagreement? I mean, it's very brave.
Well, no, I mean, historically, I'm not known as being a wallflower on the commission. So I've have a history of, when I see something, saying something in terms of what I think is sort of wrong. And this is one where, I was called upon to vote. And so I had to cast a vote and voted against it. When you vote against something, you issue a statement explaining your vote. But yeah, it was definitely one that sort of caught more attention than the normal, dissent at the FCC. But I think it's sort of because people could really sort of fundamentally understand the issue, understand the unfairness of it, and how it just wouldn't make sense to just common people to say, well, wait a minute, the government relies on Starlink all the time, and yet we're saying it's not a reliable technology. I just think it was a head scratcher for so many people that there was, a lot more attention on this dissent than normal.
Right. So for the people scratching their heads, including myself, what can I do to help you, to help Starlink, to help SpaceX?
Yeah, look, I think exactly what's going on. Just continue to sort of talk about it and amplify it. And hopefully, now that this sort of narrative is setting in, that there seems to be this regulatory harassment of Elon Musk, maybe the next agency will, think twice before pulling the punch, and they'll realize, well, look, if I do this, people are going to say, well, here they go again. This is part and parcel of the same narrative. So hopefully there is some sort of disciplining function on the administrative state that comes from people noticing and watching and calling attention to these types of decisions.
Right. Well, one of my viewers, Ross, has a question for you. The FCC website states that its role is to promote competition, innovation, and investment. Is the Starlink ruling consistent with this objective, in your opinion?
No, not at all. I mean, yeah, exactly right. We need to be sort of, spurring competition from a range of different technologies and encouraging investment, particularly in rural communities. But when you come in years after the fact and pull the rug out from under a provider that's made, not a huge capital investment, but you've like gone through this whole regulatory process, and that's a big deal. And then we come in and deny that on the back end. I think it's certainly harmful for for competition. And look, there is in the background, there's a separate program that the Biden administration is running called Internet for All, or BEAD. It's a $40+ billion initiative. And, now that these areas are no longer going to be getting Starlink service, at least not guaranteed Starlink service from the government, those areas are eligible potentially for getting service from funding out of that $40+ billion pot of money. But again, that pot of money has a real strong fiber preference. And again, I like fiber, good technology, but it's going to take years and years for that fiber to get out there.
Right. Absolutely. I've heard a lot of people make that fiber argument, and I agree with you. And Ross also wants to know, if a member of the public is unhappy about the Starlink ruling, where can they register their grievance? Via the FCC or with the federal government? Who are we going to, other than watching my channel and seeing our interview?
Well, you can certainly tweet at me. That's one way I'll see it. But yeah, look, you can file. The FCC website is there. I'm sure there's a place there where you can sort of put in a concern. I mean, at the end of the day, Elon Musk or Starlink has a chance to go to court to try to get this overturned. I think there's lots of reasons why it's legally suspect. But even if you win on appeal, you're sort of right back before the same FCC that issued the decision in the first place. So we'll see if they end up going to appeal or not. But yeah, I think we have a website. There's ways there where people can sort of submit emails, submit comments. And ultimately, it can make a difference.
Right. And, we didn't read your dissent statement out loud, but is there any part of that statement that I missed that you wanted to just reiterate? Because you made a lot of points in there.
Yeah, I think we got it all. I mean, look, frankly, to me, it's sort of obvious to everyone what is going on here. I mean, this is a technology that the government is relying on. And, the losers here are going to be, those homes and businesses that are going to stay stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide. And frankly, the taxpayer, again, instead of getting the service for $1,300 per location, is going to cost, $5,000 per location if we go fiber, or potentially even more than that. And again, it's the time value. It's just going to take a long time if we do actually make another commitment to serving these communities to get them built out with fiber. And I just think, in generally, we need to be reorienting around supporting, these sort of dynamic American innovators to make sure that they compete on the global scale. Again, particularly when you see these sort of CCP-backed technologies that are also emerging right now.
Right. And I think during your Tesla Talk interview, they kind of asked you, well, what now? Is the ball in SpaceX's court, Starlink's court? Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be some period of time here, a month or two, a window, when they could take an appeal to probably the DC Circuit, which is the appellate court here in DC, or decide to just, take the loss and move on. I mean, again, it's not going to be make or break by any stretch for the company. So they may make the decision. I don't know how they'll decide it, but they may make the decision that they're better off to just move on at this point. But I do think it's important that we continue to raise awareness of it, because again, when you just look out there at all the regulatory agencies, NLRB, FAA, now FCC, FTC, there really does seem to be a pattern. And frankly, my view is, look, if Starlink was owned by someone else or owned by the same person who had different politics, I'm pretty confident that this award would still be there, and we still have this federal commitment to bring service to those 640,000 locations. And I think it's a shame, but that's the way it broke on this one.
Well, and this was an early comment, but are you able to give us some of your background with how you got involved with being an FCC commissioner?
Yeah, it's basically like the Forrest Gump story of regulators. So my background is a lawyer. I was a lawyer at a law firm in DC, and actually joined the FCC back in 2012 as a staffer. I thought, I'll come here, work for 2 years or so, and then I'll go back to the law firm. And I've been stuck here for almost a dozen years ever since. I got the chance to work for a commissioner back then, Ajit Pai, and he was actually made chairman of the FCC when President Trump won in 2016. So then Ajit made me general counsel of the agency, which was just a lot of fun. It's a lawyer job. You're doing a lot of litigation and legal advice for the commission. So I really enjoyed that general counsel position, and it fits my background from the law firm. And then from there, I was nominated to be a commissioner in 2017. And so now I'm serving, actually now starting a second 5-year term. So each commissioner has 5-year terms. So I was renominated actually by President Biden last year and confirmed by the Senate. So I'm a Republican, but you got to have a Republican on the agencies for political balance. So so I've been here as a commissioner since 2017 at least, but it's just a really interesting opportunity. We deal with so much interesting cutting edge technologies, whether it's 5G or these latest low Earth orbit satellite issues. We don't directly regulate AI. That's sort of the main hot topic in DC these days for regulators, but we sort of observe some of that. We do a lot of national security. We took action on Huawei and ZTE early on. We took action on we call China Mobile, China Telecom, securing our network there. And I personally have spoken a lot on TikTok and the threat that I think that poses from a national security perspective. So it's a really interesting set of issues.
I was going to say, Googling your name, I see some recent, headlines about Starlink, and then a lot of TikTok. So I actually didn't look too much about what your view is on that, but it sounds like you're not a huge fan.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, I got no problem with, social media. I got no problem with short form video platforms, but TikTok in particular is a unique national security threat. And it's sort of two pieces of it. On the one hand, it's what I call surveillance. And on the second hand, it's this foreign influence. And on the surveillance piece, TikTok has now been caught, red-handed, surveilling the location of specific Americans. They've now, been caught sending just reams and reams of data back to Beijing, where they have actual members of the CCP that are either embedded at ByteDance, the parent company, or otherwise, that are gaining access to this data. On the foreign influence side, we've seen evidence where ahead of our most recent midterm election, they stood up CCP state media accounts and targeted U.S. politicians for criticism. We've seen recently, obviously, a big surge in sort of pro-Hamas content on TikTok during sort of the Hamas-Israel war, and also mental health. Look, there's studies that show how accounts set up for young girls are showing eating disorder and self-harm content within minutes, and you can contrast that with Douyin, which is a version of TikTok that's available in China, and kids there are getting shown museum exhibits, science experiments, educational materials. So it's concerning, but at its core, it's a national security threat. I think it's two components. It's that surveillance, the data piece, as well as the foreign influence. And I'm pleased with some of the progress we've made as a country. We've banned TikTok from federal devices. I don't think that goes far enough. I think what we need to do is, again, not necessarily ban the app per se, but we need to require a genuine divestment from all ties back to the CCP, whether it's ByteDance or otherwise, and then the application can continue to flourish for all I care. It's not
So should I delete my TikTok?
There is a tremendous amount of data that is collected. A lot of people say, well, what's the big deal? It's just a couple funny videos or things like that. But again, the application, once it's on your device, it can pull all sorts of data, and then the reporting shows that data, all of it, according to reports, is viewed and available in Beijing. Again, each individual person can make their own judgment call. I get that. But, as a regulator, you step back, you got millions and millions of Americans on this. And that means that China is getting, access to just sort of such a granular, detailed amount of data on that many Americans. It's concerning to me. So again, it's, the app is fine, as a short form video platform, but I think we have to find a way to break that tie, that link back to the CCP. I think that's sort of a core step that we have to take in our national interest.
Right. And I do want to go back to the Starlink decision just for a moment. You said that the original award was a bureau decision, and then this sort of denial or rejection, that was a commission decision. So is that correct?
Yes. The very first time that this started going off the rails for Starlink was in August of 2022. This is when the Bureau initially made this decision, like, we're not sure we want to go forward with this award to Starlink. The funny thing about that, or the irony part of it, I was on a work trip to a small town called Napakiak, Alaska. It's completely cut off from the road system. I went there on a boat. You had to go up the Kakasquam River. And I remember this day very, very vividly. We're in this small town, again, Napakiak, Alaska. And I met up with this mom. Her name was Rachel. She had a small kid with her. And it was the first day of school. And she told me that the school was closed, not because of COVID, but had some construction or something going on. And so they told her just to, go home and, have her kid do online work. And there's like absolutely no internet service available at all in Napakiak, Alaska. And so the mom is left, having to deal with this herself, as opposed to being able to educate her kid online with the school being closed. And she's someone that would have, like many people, gone to any lengths to have access to reliable, high-speed internet service to educate her kid. And here we are in DC revoking at that very moment this award to Starlink to provide high-speed internet connectivity to those types of areas, and saying it's just not a reliable technology. We're saying it's too expensive because the dish is $600. Again, it's communities like that that are just stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide that would give anything for the shot to have high-speed connection, whether it's Starlink or Amazon Kuiper when it gets going. Because that was the initial decision, and then the full commission, the commissioners voted, to affirm that initial decision, but also, we were essentially reviewing it de novo as well. It was sort of the first time the full commission was saying, yes, we don't think that it's reasonably likely that Starlink is going to meet its obligations by 2025.
Right. That's really unfortunate. Ross also wants to know, since this was a party line decision, like you described, what were the counter arguments made by the other Democratic FCC commissioners on the Starlink ruling? What was their counter argument?
Yeah, the only thing that no one issued a separate statement the way I did. So the item itself just sort of speaks for itself. And the item says exactly this, which is principally, they looked at two Ookla speed test data, 2 point in time, and said, well, if you draw a straight line between those two speed tests, it doesn't show that it's going to hit 120, which again, that's just not how you measure technological progress. They also looked at the Starship launch and said, well, they blew up. Those were two failures. And again, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how technology works. What was the data that we learned from the Starship launch? What does it tell us about the progress that we're on? But moreover, Starship wasn't required in order to put the Starlink satellites up there. They're using the other ship to launch all those Starlink things. So it was just fundamentally this view that said, look, we just don't think it's reasonably likely. At least that's what the decision said. Again, it's a hard decision to defend, given what the federal government is doing right now in terms of contract with Starlink, but that's what it said on its face.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, the sort of lack of education or misinformation that spreads after that first launch. I'm a journalist, and seeing the amount of headlines that said, massive failure, and then retracted within an hour, changing, it's actually not that bad because they got so much pushback.
Yeah, not the FCC. We went, full Leroy Jenkins and said, yeah, it's a failure, and just sort of stuck with that in our decision. But again, to your point, I think we know better. We have engineers here. Like we it's just, it doesn't make sense to include that in the decision.
Well, I'm very glad that someone like you is within the FCC, which sounds like it's not always making the best decisions as a whole. And I do want to talk about low Earth orbit for a moment here, just with Starlink, over 5,100 active satellites. With
Yeah.
low Earth orbit getting more crowded, we have Project Kuiper wanting to join. Is your job getting harder, getting busier because there's just more going on?
Yeah, I mean, look, the good news is there is a lot of space still up there in space, but yes, it is more crowded up there than ever. And we do actually have some regulations in this space and what we call orbital debris, which is when we license these satellite systems, including Starlink and Kuiper, we do put some baseline requirements in place to make sure that these satellites, if they fail or as they're predicted to fail, they do so in a way that's not going to cause problems. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't keep me up at night, but look, I do think it's a worry. I mean, what happens if there is, some sort of catastrophic failure, or more directly, if we have a foreign country that's not friendly to America, it wouldn't take too much to really cause some very serious problems in low Earth orbit. So it is a concern, but we do have some baseline rules in place to deal with orbital debris, and even just like the pace and cadence of launches. It's important for us to keep an eye on that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you have given us almost 40 minutes of your time. This has been a very informative discussion. And
Yep.
like I said, after seeing your statement and just reading that, and it's just like so frustrated by it, and then hearing you talk, I really personally wanted to interview you because Starlink is near and dear to me. It's how my channel started. It's how Ellie in Space became what it is today. And I think what Starlink is doing for the world is just truly, amazing. And so it's frustrating to see, just also being in like the Elon ecosphere, how much hate, not just from people on X, but obviously, governmental agencies. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of it goes back to this, disagreement with some along free speech. And it's funny to me because, this defense of free speech, this defense of diversity of viewpoints historically has been a real sort of progressive viewpoint. And it actually, the sort of the modern day op-ed actually launched on the pages of the New York Times back in 1972. And there was an editor there that really wanted viewpoints that were different from what you'd get from just the regular New York Times editors. And what that editor said, John Oakes at the time, was that diversity of viewpoints is the lifeblood of democracy. The moment we start insisting that everyone think the same way we do, our democratic way of life is in jeopardy. That was 1972. And that was a very progressive viewpoint at the time. And I just think as a culture, we have to get back to being, much more tolerant of other people's viewpoints. That doesn't mean you have to listen to it if you don't like it. But I do think everybody should have the ability to express their perspectives on the digital town square. And I just think as a country, as a culture, we've moved away from that idea of, other people being able to express their opinion towards a view that we need sort of a centralized authority, whether it's the government or Facebook or Twitter itself, to make a system-wide decision about censorship to keep people on the platform or off the platform. But again, I think the better approach is let's let individual people that are participants in the digital town square decide for themselves. If you don't want to listen to someone, don't follow them. You can mute words, you can block people. I think that's a much better way of dealing with speech that people don't like than to call upon the government or Twitter to, kick this person out of the digital town square entirely. But that's a broader debate that we're having in this country. I do think there are some signs, including Elon Musk's purchase of X, that are showing that maybe the sort of this surge towards censorship is starting to recede a little bit. But I do think there's a ways to go to sort of embrace free speech and diversity of views.
Well, I know that Elon is a controversial figure, but I think people need to realize that Elon and SpaceX are, separate. There's a lot of people that work for SpaceX, a lot of young people, a lot of people grinding away. And so it's frustrating that SpaceX and Starlink, whatever you feel about Elon, let's separate, let's unmarry the two a little bit.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me for sure.
And then just one more question here, if you have time. The FAA has kind of made the excuse that they need more resources. They need a bigger staff. Is the growth in commercial spaceflight also a pressure on the FCC resources and workload?
Yeah, a little bit. Look, and this is one where I have to give our chair credit. She stood up an entirely new bureau called the Space Bureau. So we used to have an international bureau, and then space was a component of that international bureau, and we refocused it to have an entirely space bureau. driven in large part for this exact reason, which is the pace and cadence and number of applications for satellites has just been, pun intended, sort of skyrocketing at the FCC. So we do have this new bureau, and we're trying to move faster. And I believe we have put in requests for additional resources. So we're making some changes, but I still think this is one where we at the agency need to just continue to go faster and faster on processing these applications. Hopefully this new space bureau that we have will go a long ways in sort of achieving that goal.
Well, again, I know that people have, blanket opinions of the FCC, but speaking to you personally, I'm very glad that you are working for the FCC. We really need people like you to speak your truth and bring these issues to light. So I really do appreciate you giving us some of your time today and just speaking out. It really means a lot.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. The FCC is a wonderful place to be. My colleagues are really good people. Again, we fundamentally disagree strongly on some issues, but it's a really great place. We're at the forefront of so many interesting issue areas on technology, and it's great. For me, I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be in this job. I mean, the first time I heard about the FCC was in high school, listening to Eminem complain about getting censored by the FCC, and flash forward today, and I'm the man now. Sitting here with the censor button apparently, but we didn't have any violations. We didn't have to dump any words or anything like that. So we should be good to go with this podcast.
You are real. I love it. Awesome. Did not think you'd drop an Eminem there. I'm curious. I actually just ordered the next generation Starlink so that, it's going to be a very flat design. Do you use Starlink yourself?
I don't know. I live in the suburbs here in DC. And so I've just, regular, fiber connection to my house. But yeah, I think it's a great technology. We're seeing tons of people use it. I've been up to Redmond, Washington, to sort of the factory where they're building the satellites themselves. But again, I'm hopeful that we get some more competition too, including from Kuiper. It's just an interesting time right now from a technology perspective, because for the first time, we have many different technology modes of getting people high-speed service. It used to be that you could only use your cable provider or maybe your telco with fiber, but now we've got 5G, we've got these LEO systems, we've got fixed wireless. So it's really interesting time from a competitive perspective, but the FCC sort of can miss some of these trends a little bit. I mean, look, I think I very much view my job as a regulator to pass what I sort of describe as the Gretzky test, right? Which is, Wayne Gretzky famously said, you got to skate to where the puck is going, not where it is, or particularly not where it's been. And so I think that sort of incumbent on us as a regulator to see, where are things moving from a technology perspective, and to be able to sort of accurately predict it. And, again, on Starlink, I think it's one where we sort of failed the Gretzky test, to put it lightly.
Right. Well, and historically, other companies have tried and, majorly failed to do what Starlink is doing. And for the longest time, Starlink, was still in the negative. And so they're actually succeeding in making a difference. And that's kind of something we've never really seen anyone pull off successfully to the degree that SpaceX has.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great to see the competitive entry. Again, hopeful that we get even more systems up and running. I think at the end of the day, it's the consumer that's going to benefit from more competition. Is going to help drive down prices, and carriers are going to get more and more innovative as they sort of compete, to win over people in the marketplace. I think it's a great thing.
Great. Well, I've checked off my bucket list to interview Brendan Carr. So.
Yeah, happy to do it again as stuff comes up and it's timely and interesting to you. Always happy to chat.
Awesome. Great. Well, I will keep updated with what's going on in the world of the FCC. And thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Great to be with you.
Awesome. Great.